안녕하세요, 푸디인입니다. 서울 이태원에서 열렸던 미국 버번위스키 메이커스 마크의 팝업 스토어 독트타운에 다녀왔습니다. 180년이 넘는 전통을 가진 메이커스 마크는 8대째 새뮤얼즈 가문이 제조하고 있는데요. 마침 새뮤얼즈 가문의 8대 손인 세뮤얼즈가 메이커스 마크 프라이빗 셀렉션을 소개하기에 한국을 찾았습니다. 증류소 오너 가문이 들려주는 재미있는 메이커스 마크 이야기 한번 들어보시죠.
I am the 8th generation of the Samuels family involved with producing whiskey in the Commonwealth of Kentucky, which we think is the longest lineage to make whiskey anywhere in the world. It were my grandparents, Bill and Margie Samuels, 70 years ago, who shared a vision that led to the creation of Maker's Mark. My grandparents walked away from a 160-year-old family legacy because they didn't believe in it. My grandparents actually lit that 160-year-old legacy family whiskey recipe on fire, symbolic of their commitment to reimagine what bourbon could be. My grandfather was a craftsman and was deeply committed to a taste vision for a rich, creamy, full-flavored, balanced bourbon. Almost casual one morning, my grandmother would ask, what was he going to name his new, elevated, handmade bourbon? I think he believed that he would name his new, handmade, refined bourbon after Samuels, the family. But she challenged him. She suggested that consumers would be confused with the name Samuels and that horrible, wretched, god-awful whiskey called T.W. Samuels that we had made for 160 years. He agreed and put her in charge of creating the name and designing the bottle. Several months later, she would present him with the Maker's Mark name and bottle design that's never changed. And we believe that Maker's Mark is the only whiskey in the world ever named and designed by a female. She suggested that he had gone to greater lengths than any whiskey maker in the world and that he should make his mark. The mark of the maker, or the Maker's Mark, is the star SIV that is blown into the glass bottle and also on the label. For Samuels, which is the family name, for Star Hill Farm, which is the farm home to our distillery. She was adamant that every single label on every single bottle would be printed and torn by hand at the distillery. And it was her suggestion, what better way to finish the handmade process than to hand dip each and every bottle in red sealing wax. She suggested that since each bottle would be hand dipped, that each would be a little unique, different, and special from the next. I hope you will come visit us in Kentucky and you will realize that our distillery, which today is a national historic landmark, but it is off the beaten path. Our co-founders chose the location of the distillery based on nature and the water source. Today, 95% of bourbon is made in Kentucky, and we believe that Maker's Mark is the only distillery that controls and owns our own water source. With the founder's taste vision for a rich, creamy, full-flavored, balanced bourbon, they chose soft red winter wheat as the flavoring grain. They chose to grind the grain in a roller mill, which is inefficient but doesn't scorch any of the grain. A slow cooking process and propagating our 200-year-old family yeast strain on site at the distillery. Distilling at the lowest alcohol volume of any distillery in Kentucky to ensure that the grain character and the flavor makes its way through the distillation process. Each and every group of 19 barrels of Maker's Mark always begins the maturation process at the very top of the warehouse, which is where the intense maturation begins. After 2 summers, but according to taste, each of those groups of 19 barrels are then moved by hand from the top of the warehouse to the center of the warehouse for 2 additional summers before being moved to the first or the second floor. We believe that Maker's Mark is the only distillery in the world that rotates barrels through the aging process. Last year, we physically rotated 400,000 barrels. Today at Maker's Mark, we have 35 of our team members on the tasting panel. 22 women, 13 men on the tasting panel. On average, each batch of Maker's Mark is tasted by our tasting panel 5 times before we bottle. What I can share with you is that since the beginning, on average, Maker's Mark is 6 years, 1 month, and 2 days old. Beyond producing what I believe to be the most consistent whiskey ever made anywhere in the world, on behalf of our entire distillery team, we are all very proud that in 2022, Maker's Mark became the first distillery in North America to be certified as a B Corp. For the first 60 years of Maker's Mark, we were the only distillery in the world to make one product. The average bourbon distillery makes dozens and dozens of different expressions. As my father, Bill Samuels Jr., was nearing retirement, he started talking about this idea of creating his own perfect expression of Maker's Mark. Starting with fully mature, cask strength Maker's Mark, my father, Bill Samuels, wanted to amp up the flavor and characteristics that live within Maker's Mark that he loves the most. He wanted to amp up the baking spices that live within Maker's Mark. He wanted to accentuate the caramel and the vanilla intensity and create a bit of a longer finish on the palate. After experimenting for almost 2 years, finally, after bringing together French Oak Stave Profile number 46 together with cask strength Maker's Mark, that whiskey achieved his taste vision. After Maker's Mark 46 was first released, shortly thereafter, we began to dream and ask ourselves, why wouldn't we let the most talented bartenders in the world, like all of you, have exactly the same opportunity that Bill Samuels Jr. had? What if we were to create the very first ever custom barrel program in the history of whiskey, in partnership with our cooperage, the independent stave company, we created a total of 5 proprietary, unique finishing staves. In addition to Profile 46 finishing stave, we created 4 staves that were uniquely designed to accentuate the flavor camps that live within Maker's Mark. And as many of you discovered through the tasting process, there are more than 1,000 different potential stave combinations, from light and fruity to dark and rich.